more AI, more user research, an economic case for optimism. There's no denying that conversations around AI have stirred uncertainty, especially in research, where teams are already navigating a tough job market and rapid change. It's easy to feel like automation is closing doors. But Caleb is here to help us look at this moment through a different lens, one grounded in economics, history, and data. And this is going to show us why AI might actually expand opportunities for researchers, not shrink them. For people who don't know, my name is Tara. I'm a user research partner here at Great Question, and we are a customer research tool. We make it easy to do everything from recruiting the right people, whether they're customers or non-customers, run all the methods from interviews to surveys to prototype tests, and share what you learn with your team, which helps companies like Brex, Amazon, Intuit, and many more. And a quick note before we start, you can go ahead and drop your questions in the Q&A at any time. And we're going to weave these in as we go. And then we'll also hold some time at the end for open questions. So Caleb, let's get into it. So there's a lot of anxiety in the user research world right now. There's a tough job market, constant headlines about automation, and a feeling that the ground is shifting under our feet. When you talk to researchers and designers, what are you hearing about how they're feeling?
Well, I think, I don't know that I'm hearing anything that's not will probably surprise too many people. Hearing a lot about will it take my job or dilute my expertise, or are we trading as a company or as a culture quality for cost reduction? Are we trading away our quality work? Those kinds of things. Hearing a lot of different versions of those. Those can be framed different ways. But I would say that summarizes the majority of the kind of anxiety out there.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And from your point of view, why do you think there's such a sense or fear, the sense of scarcity around AI and user research? And why do you think that fear might be misplaced?
Um, well, I think there's a lot of reasons for that fear right now, and it changes over time. I think there's some economic factors certainly at play, and that'll come and go as the larger economy comes and goes. But I think there are also some more enduring UX specific fears that come into play, like many people seeing UX as, well, maybe we're not seen as essential, we're seen as non-essential, and so that makes us easier to replace, to make routine with automation, or
Mm.
that we do have that value, we're not non-essential, but our value is hard to communicate. It's more difficult to communicate than some of these other roles or fields. I think there's also just this idea that negative news spreads faster, and so it takes a little bit for value to catch up to that. And that I think there's a little bit of that's true. But I think something that stuck out for me is this idea that a lot of people have of a zero-sum game, or a zero-sum game mentality, where if there's value brought in from something else that does something I used to do, now there's less for me to do, and there's less value for me to bring, and so it's eating up some of that pie. So I think in general that kind of fear that the pie is being eaten up and there's less for me, I think that's certainly present in a lot of the feelings people express.
Mm-hmm.
And then, okay, I guess you also mentioned, why is it misplaced? I mean, just I think we'll dive more into these things, but just off the top of my head, I think a few reasons why is one, just because more skill is brought in from any source. It doesn't have to be AI. A lot of these things that we'll talk about today, I think, will apply beyond AI. But because more skill is brought in, doesn't mean there's less value for our skills, or for skills that we can grow into. It doesn't mean there's necessarily less value for us. And then the second I would say is that, um, you know, we're more important sometimes when other skills are brought in, which is counterintuitive. We can dive more into that. But when AI tooling is brought in, sometimes that makes the human in the loop more critical and not less critical, which, it's one of those kind of economic paradoxes that we see. And then the last one that comes to mind, I mean, there's so many we could go through, but the last one that comes to my mind is that it may be the case that businesses and sectors of the economy actually demand more researchers and designers and content folks as they automate some of these tasks. Again, another one of these paradoxes we can go into. So I think those are a few reasons why they're misplaced, because we're buying into like the reverse of what we have traditionally seen happen across the economic landscape.
So, Caleb, you're starting to weave in some of the theories you'll be talking about. And before we get into that in more detail, um, what's your big picture take on this moment? If there's anything that you didn't already speak to. So, what's really happening here, and why are we in such a pivotal time?
Well, I think my big picture take is take a deep breath. Uh, there's
Mhm.
it's a marathon, not a sprint, and a lot is happening that is going to change the way we work and going to change things in our personal lives forever, which happens with these major technological revolutions. So I think just take a breath. I think a lot of people are sprinting, and so they're already tired. So take a big breath and realize that there's a long way to go, and we're not exactly sure what the road looks like, and AI still has many issues today. So like we need to consider that there are limitations and there are constraints, and we're not sure when or how we're going to overcome all of these. Some of the roads are more clear than others. And so just take a breath and like let's navigate one thing at a time as we look to the future. There's a lot of unknown and there's a lot of risk in both directions. I mean, there's risk. We always talk about the risk of replacing tasks with AI, but there's the opposite too. There's the risk that we don't adopt automation or AI for tests that we should. So there's a lot of unknown, there's a lot of risk. So I say just take a breath and like let's take it one step at a time. The effects are exponential. And I think that's hard for people to put their mind around is that we can things can seem slow and incremental, and then just 6 months later, the landscape can totally change. And so I wouldn't be too focused on the now, but kind of focused on the big picture. Like take a step back and let's just like look at the trajectory and where we're going and how we fit into that. I think sometimes that's more helpful than feeling like need to learn every little tool now or understand how your job is going to change in every little way now. Like that's too stressful. I don't think anybody can, if anybody tells you they know what everything's going to look like 5 years from now, I just don't believe them. Instead, just take it one step at a time.
I love that, Caleb. Thanks. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to digging into this in more detail and curious like the risk of not adopting AI, and talking about that, as well as I think is going to be fascinating. Um, so there's a few economic principles that you've already been talking about, that are really going to play a role in this kind of like new era, I guess, of user research. Um, and so two of these, as I understand, are comparative advantage and the O-ring theory. Do you want to talk to us about that, starting with the comparative advantage
Sure.
theory?
I do think comparative advantage is probably the central theory. So if people forget everything else from this conversation, I think that's probably the core piece. And I originally, wrote a little blog article about it because I was seeing no one talking about it. I've seen a few folks talk about it since then, so I'm glad. Like it seems like it's starting to make its way more into the conversation. And I've even seen some economists talking about it who are not in UX, who are bringing it into the conversation about tech and what's going on with tech and AI right now. And so I'm glad that that's happening more. But when I was originally thinking of it, I was thinking, oh, this applies so beautifully, and I'm not hearing anyone talk about it. So I wanted to talk about it a little bit. But for those who are unfamiliar, comparative advantage is a theory, really old theory. Like if you take an economics 101 in like high school or college, it's probably one of the first things you went through, especially macroeconomics. And it's credited to David Ricardo, who's an economist in the early to mid 1800s. I think it was 1816. Someone can Google and tell me if I'm wrong. But essentially, in a nutshell, he was trying to explain like why would a foreign or why would a country trade with another country if they're just better at making everything? If they're just more efficient and more effective at making everything, why wouldn't they just engage in autarky and just be self-sufficient? Why do all these countries trade and why is it beneficial? And what I'm saying about countries or what this theory says about countries applies to companies, it applies to individuals, it applies at every degree and every unit of analysis. And so that's what he was trying to explain. So what it essentially says is that um, when you have multiple units, let's just say two countries, and they're trading or they have things that they're producing that they could trade, there will be more output for everyone to consume. There will be better and more output if they do what they are comparatively better at, what they have the comparative advantage in, as opposed to the absolute advantage. The absolute advantage is just what they're better at. So they can make 500 widgets, another country can make 100 widgets. They have the advantage. The comparative advantage is what they suffer the least opportunity cost for making. So if I spend my time making A, I can't make B with that time. And so my opportunity cost is not making B. And I'll share my screen just a second to kind of show a visual of this. But that's the basic idea is you have the comparative advantage in that which you have the least opportunity cost for doing. And so Ricardo's theory was that countries should spend their time making those things that they have the least opportunity cost of making, that they have the greatest comparative advantage. And if everyone does that, we'll all be better off because each can specialize in what they need to do, and then they can trade with one another. And then this has been applied. I mean, obviously that was 200 years ago. This has been applied in all kinds of different contexts outside of that. And I mentioned I'll share my screen, so let me go ahead and do that now to add a little visual to this, and then I'll apply it to maybe a UX context. There we go. There we go. Okay. And I did make this with Nano Banana. Like I was trying out the new version and it's a one-shot prompt. So I know there's like a typo somewhere in here, but I just left it because I thought, oh, it's pretty good for a one-shot prompt. So, um, so anyway, this is just a quick example where you got two countries. You've got country A, you've got country B, and let me know if you can't if you can't see my screen, by the way. And country A, they're making steel and corn. And in this example, country A has the advantage in corn and steel, so they have absolute advantage. So country A can just make more corn and they can make more steel. And this is over a period of time. So 100 units of corn over one period of time, you could say a year. So 100 units of corn per year or 50 steel per year, and country B can do 60 units of corn or 40 units of steel. And this is like a classic setup. So like if you've taken Econ 101, you've probably seen a matrix that looks just like this. Um, but you can see in this scenario, like if you convert it to a ratio, so when I make a unit of corn, how much steel am I giving up? What's my opportunity cost, or vice versa? If I'm making a unit of steel, how much corn am I not able to make? You can see that country A has the comparative advantage in corn. So when they make corn, they give up the less steel. So their opportunity cost is less in steel as a ratio. So we're just converting, we're just dividing one by the other and creating a ratio. And same thing for country B on steel. So country B has the comparative advantage in steel. And whenever you have a scenario like this, you're always going to have a comparative advantage, unless everyone was just exactly the same in all attributes and just the same in making everything, which doesn't really ever happen. Then you're going to have a comparative advantage somewhere. And this applies if you made it 10 countries or 100 countries. We're just using two for simplicity. So you can see how if both of them were to just split it 50-50 and say, well, I'm going to spend half my time making corn and half my time making steel, I think I did the math. I think you end up with 125 total units of corn and steel. But if they engage in only what they are comparatively best at, then they end up with 140. So you have a net gain of 15. So this is just an example. Sometimes the gains will be huge, sometimes the gains will be small. But the principle here to take away is that if each country or person or company or whatever unit of analysis makes what they're best at, makes what they are comparatively best at, then everyone will end up better off. There will be more total output uh, than if they isolated themselves and only did what they were absolutely best at and said kind of you go off and do your own thing. And so if you were to you could easily just replace all these numbers, replace these names with UX research tasks, for example. So you could say instead of country A, it's person A, and instead of country B, it's AI. So person versus AI, or actually it should be reversed for my example here. So country A is AI and country B is a person. So maybe, and this is assuming AI could just do everything better than humans. So I'm assuming like the most drastic scenario, and maybe that's a separate conversation of if that's ever even going to happen. But I'm just going to assume that for the sake of like embracing the fear that a lot of people have. But you can see, well, let's say that they could do AI can run 100 surveys or 50 interviews per year, or you could pick whatever task you want, and vice versa, and the same for a person. They can run 60 surveys or 40 interviews a year, or make it whatever research task you want. You can quickly see like it's better for AI to do what it's best at, and for the person to do what they're best at, and the company that has hired them both or that is using them both will end up better off. They'll end up with more total studies. And so you could do that with research insights, or you could do that with design changes, or any number of things. Or you could break it up into tasks. So maybe it's a single study, but the AI is doing this portion of it, and the human's doing this portion of it. Same principle applies. There's still going to be a comparative advantage no matter how you slice it up. You can make it really, really micro, or you can make it really macro. You can make it over the course of 10 minutes or 10 years. This principle is going to apply. It's just going to expand and contract. So that's the principle of comparative advantage. I know I spent a little extra time talking about it, but and I won't spend this much time on the others, but I do because I think it's a theory that is often misunderstood. People confuse the comparative piece with the absolute piece, and they look at AI and they say, well, if AI can write a survey quicker and it's basically the same quality, which I don't know that that's true today, but let's just say it is, then then I should never write a survey. And it's like, well, no, that's not at all what this series states, right? Like it might still be better in certain situations for you to write the survey, or maybe it writes it and you edit it. Maybe there's a breakdown of tasks between you and this tool. So I think that's the basic theory. You can go deeper than that, but that's the basic theory, and I think that's the essentials of kind of how it applies to UX, uh, especially research. But you can do the same thing with design or content or writing or whatever you'd like to do.
Caleb, as you were talking, I was thinking about, and maybe I'm alone in this, but sort of the challenges in understanding what AI is better at, and in user research, being deliberate on the processes that you adopt in using AI, and sort of assessing where is it working well and where is it not working well overall, and then across different tools as well as across different kinds of tasks. So some research methods AI might better serve in some places versus others. I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on that or ways of thinking about that given this framework.
Yeah, I think a good way for people to think about it, because people ask me a lot, like if I get in these conversations with people a lot, like we just get sidetracked from the work we should be doing, and start talking about AI. And sometimes people ask me, okay, well, what are these tasks? Like, it's great to have this theory, and maybe we will talk about this more later. But I think that's a good mindset to have, is to say, let me stop and think, one, what I'm better at, and two, what I'm comparatively better at. And we should be doing this with our tools already. I mean, like it's not just AI. But you think like, okay, well, I get maybe the difference in value between me and AI doing this task is small. Maybe I'm better at it, but it's a small difference. But I'm way better at this other thing that's much higher risk. And so I'm going to make sure I'm really focusing on the higher risk task because AI is terrible at that, or the risk of it being wrong is so high. I have to be 99 or 100% on that. And so even though I'm better at this other task, maybe I'll shift my task load around, and that's how I spend my time. So I think that's a good way to think about it, is like stop and do a log of your tasks, how you spend your day, your workflows, and look at where you might have a comparative advantage over AI and over the other tools that you use.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you for breaking that down. Do you want to move on to your other frameworks, or
Yeah,
I'm
I'm
not
happy
sure
to
if
move
there's
on.
anything?
I think we'll circle back, as we talk,
Mhm.
because these kind of all mingle together. So I'm happy to move on.
Great. So one of the other frameworks I know that you talk about in your article is the O-ring theory, which argues that as AI takes on more, it does more things, the relative value of human user researchers actually increases. So I'd love for you to maybe first of all just give an overview of this theory and then sort of unpack that idea a bit more for us.
Yeah, I'll unpack it really quickly, and say that this one's a more recent theory. So I think it was in the 90s. A Nobel Prize was won by Kramer, I think Michael Kramer, and he used it to explain. His big example was the Challenger shuttle disaster, and to explain how that happened. But essentially, what O-ring theory says is that when you have a group of skilled workers, he was trying to explain particularly, why do groups of skilled workers like tend to gravitate towards the same skill level. They tend to clump together naturally, and he was trying to figure out why that was the case. And what out of that kind of came this O-ring theory that says that, or essentially, the weakest link, like you're only as strong as your weakest link. That's my simple way of putting it. If you go read about it, there's a lot more behind it than that. But it's saying, if you have a ring, if you have a production ring of people who are working on one thing, they're working on producing one outcome, all it takes is one person to have an outsized negative effect. Another way of putting it is, if you have a team of 10 people and nine of them are like working at a 9 or 10 out of 10 level of quality, and one of them's down at a 3, it's going to pull the whole team much further down than we would sort of intuitively think. Maybe another way of saying it is, let's say 1 out of 10 people is not doing their job well. You would think, okay, well, we're going to lose 10% of our efficiency, but it's often more like 50 or 75%. Or if it's a mission critical task, the whole project could go under, like the shuttle disaster, like the Challenger disaster. So that's essentially what O-ring theory is saying. And when you apply that to AI, what it's saying is as we automate a lot of tasks and as we bring in more, like we have this agent and then we have this agent that verifies what this other agent does, and then this agent writes the prompt for this agent, and there's all these connectors, so it's connecting like all your Google stuff to all your Microsoft stuff. And as these systems become more complicated and they're doing things more autonomously, the humans that we do have in that loop become more critical because they are essentially points of failure. They're points where just like, and the same thing goes vice versa. Like, don't think it's all in the human. Like, if we have crappy AI, it can do the same thing. It can bring our whole. So that's the importance of making sure we're including AI at the right time. So as a side note, but on the human side of things, um, we need that researcher or that designer or whoever it is to be doing a high quality job, and they might think, well, my job is less critical because look at all this AI around me. Like it's doing half of this or 75% of this all that we used to do all by ourselves. But actually, the Kremer's theory says they actually become more critical to the end success of the product. So you can apply this to product teams too. Like I'm sure a lot of us can probably relate to this. Like if you think about PM, a designer, a researcher, maybe a content writer, some engineers, like all it takes is like one of those points to fail, and it can pull the whole project down quite a bit. So that's essentially what his theory is getting at.
And do you think that this would change what researchers' roles would be or should be?
So I don't think this theory does. There may be others that do. Comparative advantage might be one, right? Like, so if you're doing what you're comparatively better at, that might shift your role, to the left or right. I think this one more puts emphasis on points of failure, and it does make you focus on those tasks for which AI and humans are the best fit. So not just comparatively best, so that's the comparative advantage bit, but they're the least likely to fail, and you have to balance that against what's mission critical and what isn't going to drag the whole team down as much, or the product or the end result or whatever you're working on as much if it fails. So I think to me this theory more is encouraging because it says, hey, we're actually going to be more valuable in a sense, but it's also a little bit puts a little bit of pressure on the researcher or the designer because that's true. And so I think it becomes more important to identify where we are most valuable, and to ensure we have the right processes and skills, and that we're matching people of the right skills together to accomplish these tasks. And as we integrate AI, that we're doing it in a smart way, and we're not just throwing AI, up against the wall because Kremer's theory says, hey, if you get just one of those wrong, your whole project's going to suffer for it.
Yeah, I like that point. And something I've been thinking about is the automation bias, right? And how I feel like right now we're in the situation where generative AI, for example, makes tasks faster. It is automating a lot of the things that we would do in user research. And it's sort of implicitly telling us that we should be faster, we should be executing more. And, there's a lot of models present findings. If you were to give it a data set, present it very confidently. And it can be easy to fall into automation bias where you're just accepting, what the model says is going on in your data, which, I recently, as of like 24 hours ago, caught it doing that, making some claims that were based on correlational data and making causal inferences. And just how easy it can be to not think about those things or take your role seriously, and being very active in critical thinking with AI. So that's definitely something that's on my mind related to this.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. Yeah, I don't have a lot to add to that except for that it's a great illustration.
Well, we can go ahead and move on. One of the other things we're going to talk about today is sort of the historical context of and the paradoxes of progress. So history has proof of these dynamics playing out in the real world. And I'm curious if you have any historical examples to point out to us to show us how new technology transforms work rather than eliminating it entirely.
Yeah, I think I love reading about these things, and I'm going to give a few famous examples. But if you go Googling or if you use like AI to go find some, you can find a lot of these examples. So I work in banking, so this one's always been interesting. Actually, it was interesting to me before I worked in banking, but even more so now. And that's around ATMs. Automated teller. I mean, you can't get more on the nose of I'm going to take your job than you're a teller, and I'm going to install an automated teller. There was a lot of fear over ATMs. Now, it wasn't economy wide, so it's not like what we're seeing in AI. That's certainly a bigger fear, I think, here. But amongst the people of for whom it was looking like it was going to directly impact and did impact many of them, it was a bit of a panic. And a lot of economists were looking closely at this to say, okay, when they start dropping these in, it happened over a very short period of time. It was just a couple of years. It's not like they did this slowly over 10 years. Once they had these proof of concepts, they dropped ATMs all over the place. I think they dropped, oh, I think it's 400,000 in the course of just a couple of years all over the country, really all over the world. And yeah, bank tellers thought that this is the end for us. A lot of them went to other careers, and there was a lot of panic and fear. But the short story is that actually the number of bank tellers increased, and there were lots of other roles that were created that some of them shifted into. And so banks continue to hire them and open more branches. And it's not like we just have a bunch of standalone ATMs and they got rid of all the branches. None of that happened. They opened more branches and they hired more bank tellers. Now their tasks did shift. It's not that they were doing the same thing day to day. They did some of the same tasks, but they also shifted to a lot more like relationship management. There were more complex issues that an ATM either couldn't solve at all or it didn't have the comparative advantage in, and so they were doing a lot of those tasks. And then, of course, all of the nuances that comes with dealing with people and talking to people, they handle a lot of those. So, for many of them, it was the same job with a set of new responsibilities, which is different from just shifting to a whole new job. Some of them did shift to new jobs, but a lot of them had the same basic job. They shifted to having new responsibilities. And the same thing's kind of true in accounting. Accounting has happened over a longer span of time, like decades, as opposed to a few years, because it wasn't a single technology that caused it. It was a series of technology shifts. But the same basic thing happened there, whereas as accounting tasks were automated, a lot of accountants thought there's not going to be anything for me to do. Like I'm just a calculator, and they're inventing automatic calculators. So what's there for me to do? And same story. They shifted more strategic thinking, more personalized appointments with clients, things of that nature, things that they were comparatively better at. And if you look at like the labor statistics around accounting, it's just like bank tellers, it's grown faster than the national average since then over the course of several decades. And then like, there's still a bright outlook. I went and Googled some reports of what the outlooks are for these, and they're still really bright. Like people still think that they're going to continue to grow. And so that was not at all a feeling of people in these fields at the time. They thought, okay, we are going to either have a sharp or a slow decline until we're irrelevant. We need to figure out what we're going to do about this. But they did shift job responsibilities, and that's opposed to like I guess the last example I'll give, just to juxtapose it a little bit, is all of the mechanization in agriculture, because a lot of these jobs were lost as we mechanized a lot of farming tasks and other agricultural labor. It is true, like those jobs were actually lost. Like people are not doing those jobs anymore, or very, very few. But really, what happened is new roles opened up in higher order thinking, strategic thinking, some of them in like person to person communication. And that's where a lot of the labor shifted. That's where a lot of people went. So they may have, in that case, they may have dropped their job entirely and shifted job titles and job responsibilities as opposed to just kind of shifting around within the same role. But more roles were opened up. And then, of course, this isn't even counting all of the like secondary roles. Like because of those roles and because the industry became so much more productive, there are lots of new tech jobs around all the technology. There's lots of new jobs around the robotics. Like that's not even counting those jobs. That's just counting the people who are working in that field who shifted maybe from working out in the field to working in an office or to working or to being more of an more of a like an overseer rather than a direct operator of the equipment. So completely different job roles as opposed to the accountant or the teller. but nonetheless, kind of the same big picture story, which is a lot of economists were surprised. Like they thought, okay, well, a whole sector of our economy is going to go away, and we're going to have to replace those jobs with something entirely different. Like they're going to have to move, they're going to have to move into banking, or they're going to have to move whatever. But it wasn't true. They still work. Well, a lot of them still work in agriculture to this day, and there's a lot less fear around it now than it was there were at the time. So I could I made that distinction to say I don't know. I think we can, as if we're thinking about this in UX terms, we can probably think of lots of ideas of how this applies. But there may be some cases where a UXer's job just shifts a little bit, and their focus shifts, and they have to, maybe like focus on this skill set as opposed to that skill set. And there may be other times when they have to adopt an entirely new skill set to complement what they were doing before. And I think that's part of the discussion and like what we're going to have to figure out going forward. And part of the comparative advantage discussion is where do we have the comparative advantage and where are we going to shift as we learn that going forward. But those are some historical examples that I think can give people, especially people who are getting a lot of anxiety or having a lot of fear on this, a little bit of hope that this isn't the first rodeo. That a lot of people have had these fears and their jobs have been, stared in the face by automation or technological shifts. And this is kind of what's happened. I think in the article I wrote on this, I included a great quote from an economist, but I don't have it in front of me, so I'm not going to read it. But it's a great quote on essentially how it is like a paradox. We always think something's going to go away, but we can't see what's on the horizon. Like we can't see the new things that are going to come about. And so we only focus on what we know is going away or what we think is going away, as opposed to the new things that are coming. And so I think this helps us to refocus on not just the negative, not just what's going away or the task we used to love doing that we're not going to do anymore, although hopefully a lot of those are tasks we don't like to do, but also to focus on the good opportunities that are going to be created as a result.
Thank you, Kale. I love this. I love the framing that you're giving. I did have one question that perhaps is just playing exactly into this paradox, but I'll ask it anyway, which is there any possibility that AI is such a more advanced technology that this historical data, historical information, like it doesn't apply?
It's a great question. That's actually the most common objection I
Mm,
hear when I have like a longer conversation.
mm,
And I hear it a lot like in political talk too. And that's where people go. So say, no, this is different this time. And
mm,
I love the conversation because I don't see a reason right now to think it is different. Usually when people say that, they're thinking of the worst case scenario in their mind, like AI is like a sci-fi movie where often AI combined with robotics, so it can also do physical tasks, and it can just do everything we can do better. But what these theories suggest is that even in that doom and gloom scenario, which I'm not sure how close that even is, that's a whole nother conversation.
mm,
We still like comparative advantage is still going to be true no matter what, and as long as humans are around and involved, like O-ring theory is still going to be true, and there are lots of other economic theories that are still true. So these theories are still going to hold true, and we are still going to have value to provide. And one thing I would say is that humans are endlessly creative and we have endless demand. And so whenever there is, I didn't write about this and I don't think we've talked about it so far, but the idea of creative destruction is often brought up. That's a popular theory, the idea that we destroy something that we're doing now to make way for something else. But the tough part of that is the creative part, is that we can't see what's necessarily on the horizon. So I think
mm,
even in that more kind of big picture doomy kind of scenario where we can't do anything anywhere close to as good as AI can do. We're still just we're shorting ourselves a little bit because I think humans are always going to demand more, and there's always going to be sort of some comparative advantage that we can take
mm,
advantage of. But I think we should focus at least in the short to midterm on not the doom and gloom scenario. Like we should always have in the back of our mind. I think that's important. But there's so much opportunity right now, like the next 5, 10, 15 years, however long, where there's a lot of opportunity, and there's huge areas of both absolute and comparative advantage where we can provide value. So I think right in front of us, we should focus on that, but we shouldn't lose hope because I think these principles are going to hold true, even if AI is much bigger. And I don't think, in that sense, it's different than other technologies. It is different in some other ways, but at least in that way, I don't think we should say it's different from other technologies, so therefore it doesn't count. And we have to rethink our economic models entirely.
I love that. That makes sense. Thank you for counterbalancing my doom and gloom perspective. Something you were sort of alluding to previously was something called Jevons paradox, which is that increasing the efficiency of a resource or task through technology does not lead to a decrease in overall consumption, but in fact, often an increase. So I think that this must help explain some of these historical examples that you shared. And I'm curious your thoughts on how that might apply to user research.
Yeah, and this is another one of those funny paradoxes. And you can think of a lot of examples. Like if you stop, you could probably just think of so many off the top of your head. But a great one is cars, because cars used to be so labor intensive to make. And I'm not even just talking about like the Model T. Like even in the 80s and 90s, they were still much more resource intensive to make than they are now. But we've automated a lot of it. And we've created a lot of both process and technology to make it much quicker and easier to make. And what Jevons paradox says is that when things are made more efficient to produce, people actually want more of them, and so we need to produce more of them, and so it's this kind of rolling effect. And so people, you would think that people would just, if people are buying 1 million cars a year in a country, that if we make them more efficiently, then they're just going to keep buying 1 million a year at a lower price, and then they have more money for other things. But Jevons paradox says no, like now they might buy two cars. They might have a luxury car and a, or they might have a travel car, an electric car, and a gas car, or they might go off-roading in a car, or they might now they get a car for their child, or like what, there's a million reasons, but now there's demand that was there that we didn't even know that demand was there. And now that technology has made it more efficient to produce these things, demand increases, or demand uh, um, expands, so that we need to produce more. And so it rolls these, and we see this grow industries. I mean, we see this in banking too. Like I mentioned, ATMs have done that for branches. They've made a lot of branches more in demand. So that's the basic idea of it. And I think it applies because we have to think about our industry, and as we are made more efficient, or as our work is made more efficient, and we're able to get more studies done per month or per year, or more surveys, or more, as we're able to do more analysis, or maybe like we can produce our reports in a couple of hours or 30 minutes as opposed to a day or two. What are we going to do with all that extra time? And I think the assumption some people make, and on the negative side of things, is that we are not going to do anything because we're not going to have a job, or we're just going to try to get AI to do all of it. But Jevons paradox says there's going to be more demand. Like now, companies are going to say, okay, well now we have more room for more research to produce more products to push to consumers, or so we have to think, what are we going to do with that extra time? What are we going to do with that extra capital? Like companies, when they get that extra capital, they have to decide what they're going to do with it. Now, I will add the caveat that this paradox is only true when demand is elastic. And what economists mean when they say demand, or they talk about demand or price elasticity, that's a technical term. All it means is that when price changes, how sensitive is demand? So some things we demand roughly the same amount of, whether price goes up or down, like gasoline is a good example. If we might complain about the price of gas, but the degree to which it's sold doesn't change very much with its price. But there are other things like fast food, or clothing, that does change drastically. People buy a lot more McDonald's when the price, like if the price of McDonald's were to double tomorrow, their sales would plummet, or vice versa. If they were giving out dollar burgers, like everybody would go to McDonald's. And that's so that means it's highly price elastic. So I think that UX is highly demand elastic, because I think that when more capital comes into companies or sectors, we do see them spend more of it on research and design and trying to understand customer needs and provide products for them. So as long as you believe that's true, then we should look to how we're going to spend our time as AI makes us more efficient. And so I think that's where our mindset should go, as opposed to thinking doom and gloom about, okay, well now that we're made more efficient, the company doesn't need as many of us, or the sector of the economy doesn't need as many researchers, designers, writers, whoever it is. Instead, we should think, how are we going to use that efficiency? In fact, we might have the opposite problem. We might be asked to do so much more because we're more efficient, that we have to deal with that issue. So I think that's another way of looking at it, and kind of looking at it from a positive perspective as opposed to a negative one.
This paradox is so counterintuitive to me, and I find it really fascinating to sort of shift my thinking to adopt this way of thinking. And I'm kind of curious your thoughts on, it does seem right now like the trend is that more is expected out of user researchers with adopting AI tools. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts on, how researchers might manage this increase in demand without burning out, sort of balancing efficiency with sustainability. Or perhaps that's a whole other conversation, but I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I can give you a few. I can give you a few short thoughts. I think it's not going to be. It shouldn't be that much different than how we do it today. I mean, designers and researchers have been experiencing burnout for a long time, so that's not an AI problem. Now, it could be made worse with AI. I grant that. That could be the case. I'm not sure, but I think we have to handle it in much the same way. We need to first be honest about it and just be transparent and say, okay, this is putting more demands on my time, perhaps because of Jevons paradox, perhaps because I'm able to produce more. Now I'm expected to produce even more than that. But it's a tool. AI is a tool, and so I think we need to treat it like that and to communicate the value and the impact of the tool and how we're using it to be more efficient and to manage our workflows and our outputs. So we can't just we can't have let's how do I put it, like an undefined output target. We have to have input and output targets, and we have to explain them, and we have to understand what's the value that we're providing with these tools, and where's the stopping point so that we don't go beyond that, because burnout's not good for anybody. It's not good for an individual, and it's also not good for a team in the long term. So I think explaining and communicating that clearly is a good step. First, understanding it for yourself, like there is real burnout, and it's not your fault. And now, like, let's take the right steps to address it, and then also communicating that well to whoever it is, your boss or your company or a client, whoever it might be. Communicating that there's a balance between the two, and like here's the sweet spot of where we're not burning out, but we're also producing what we're looking to produce. So that's the short version of it. I mean, there are lots of tactics, and there's books written about it, and of how you can manage that. But to me, we're managing it largely how we've managed it in the past. We might just need to be more on top of it, and to clearly communicate it to the folks that need to hear it.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I appreciate the reminder that burnout is is already common, in user research before AI. That's a really good call out. So we've got about 15 minutes left. I wanted to spend a few minutes just kind of talking about like looking ahead with AI and user research, and kind of coming back to something you mentioned at the beginning of the session, which is that user researchers should stop and kind of like take a breath, look at the big picture around AI, and that we should consider that there's a risk with not engaging with AI and new technologies. So in research specifically, what opportunities do we risk missing out on by sort of like staying on the sidelines?
Well, what do we miss on them by staying on the sidelines? Um, well, I think we miss out on a lot of these opportunities that are produced through the theories we've been talking about. Because if it does shift our roles, or at least shift the value that we can provide, like somebody is going to fill that space and try to provide that value. So I think we will miss out on that if we are not paying attention, and also if we're not energetic enough to pursue those opportunities. So I'd say sitting on the sideline, like we'll miss out on that. And I don't want to just focus on the negative. A lot of people say, well, we're going to miss out on jobs. And it's like, yes, that's true, but it's even beyond just having a job. Like we're going to miss out on the impact of our research, which is what, like, most people that get into UX research, and if I ask them why, they say something along the lines of like, I want to make an impact on the world or on a product or on, for the individual, like I want to make users' lives better, something along those lines. And so we're going to miss out on those opportunities to do that increasingly if we don't take advantage of these opportunities. So I think that's a big one. I also think, a lot of these tools are going to take burden off of us in some tasks that we don't like to do. We worry a lot about the tasks that we do like to do that they might take away, but we don't think about all of these tasks that are routine, that maybe just go on the back burner for us, but it's going to automate a lot of those. And so we're going to miss out on that opportunity too, to get rid of work we don't want to do and focus on the work we do want to do.
Yeah. Yep. And kind of like speaking to this a little bit more concretely, like what things are humans still especially suited to address in user research? Like is this around like ethical nuance in conducting research, or, like where do you think we should be focusing?
I've spent a lot more time thinking about this recently because this is where the questions always come to this. And if I'm in conversation with folks, I have to say, I don't know, you tell me, because this is a hard one. But I've thought I've spent more time thinking about it recently, and reading what other folks are saying. And I think one is ethics. Like that's always going to be one. So for sure, I'd say lock that one down. I think another one is any kind of goal defining tasks. Right now, we have to give AI most of its goals, especially higher order goals. Now we can write a script or a prompt for an AI to create its own goal, but it's based off of our goals, right? It's based off of our script. And so I think humans have the advantage, and definitely the comparative advantage now, at goal defining. Like, what is a goal worth pursuing? How do you frame that goal? Because the bounds can be really wide or they can be really narrow. Like, do we want to
Mm.
focus on this or do we want to go out? Like, humans are much better at defining that. And a lot of projects, research projects or product projects are goal bound, and so I think that's a big area. Anything that's goal bound, I think humans are better at. Um, and I would certainly say, like, some people have called it task decomposition or delegation. I think that's another big one. Is humans are much more efficient at taking in all the nuanced context around them and delegating tasks appropriately. AI right now is not very good at that. Again, it's very good. AI is very good at bounded tasks when we know what the context are, where the edges and the borders are. It's very, very good at operating in that space creatively, even, but it needs that space. And humans are very good at stepping outside of that kind of in a meta way, and looking at how should all these tools be delegated and how should these tasks be decomposed. Because one of the interesting things that I've learned is that if you look at a lot of these AI benchmarks that people are always throwing around, like Meter is a big one, METR. There's lots of other ones about, and you'll see AI is like always like exponentially increasing, and it's big and it's scary because it's like, look how much better AI is now than 3 months ago or 6 months ago. But there's the flip side of that is, I think it was, I want to go. I should have pulled this before we talked. I can't remember which group it is, so I don't want to say the wrong group. But I was looking at some data recently from a university on how many tasks AI can fully automate. And it's like 2.2%. It's very, very low. There's very few tasks, like especially long form tasks, that AI currently today is doing it. So that means humans are having to do a lot of task delegation. Which part of this task do I want you to do versus me to do? And there's a lot of decision making that involves a lot of context. And humans have so much more context than we can even express in words. And so we much less can we put it in a prompt. And so anything that's really not just goal driven, but context driven, I think that humans are going to have a lot of comparative advantage there. High risk task, I mentioned that earlier, but that's a big one. So certainly decisions that are high risk, certainly interpersonal things where you need touch or you need a personal human element to it. And then judgment, or some people are calling it taste. I see a lot of the AI community talking about taste, but to me, taste, judgment, they're similar ideas. So where sometimes you need that nuanced human judgment that just cannot be concretely described, and AI just cannot do it. It just struggles, and I'm not sure how soon it's going to be able to make some of those judgment calls. So I just rattled off a
Yeah.
bunch of areas to you, but I think they're all, some of them crisscross with one another. But I think those are all areas where humans either have the absolute or the comparative advantage, and those are good starting points for thinking about how does that apply in UX research in particular, like goal defining for research, or delegating different tasks for developing study materials or delivering reports. You could think about where these things apply within those smaller tasks within a typical research workflow.
Those are all great examples, and especially the full end-to-end one, right? That no, the AI isn't. It's only 2.2 tasks that I can do from start to end. And it also made me think about how one of the things in user research that is often sort of a like a necessary task is to keep insights alive, and to keep advocating for those things. And that might be another aspect as well. We do have a couple of questions in the chat, so I want to move us along. I'm just going to go down in the order that they were received. So the question is, How would you handle stakeholders that are abusing their usage of AI? With the example being that maybe a stakeholder is taking your research data, using AI to synthesize it, and making decisions on incorrect synthesis.
Yeah. Again, I think I would handle this like if they were using a different tool to do that, because stakeholders have done that. Stakeholders have been misusing data for a long time. So I think I would approach them and ask them, what is your end goal here? And hopefully we share an end goal. Hopefully our goal is to build good products or to build good user experiences. If not, then maybe we can find some common ground. But that's where I would want to start, and then I would want to move to, okay, is this the best method for achieving that goal? Like, where is the disconnect between us? Because there's risk here, and I think you have to understand first why the stakeholder is doing that. Are they doing that because they don't understand the strengths and weaknesses of AI in its current form? Are they doing it because they don't value research or they don't value UX? That happens sometimes. Are they doing it because they're just confused? Are they doing it because they don't want to bother you because they think you or your team are too busy? There are lots of different reasons they might be doing that. So I would first want to get at the heart, like, what are they trying to achieve and why are they trying to achieve it? And then once we've pinpointed that problem, then we can address it. And some of them will be quick. It might be oh, well, here's the process you can go through to engage with us for research. And that might be the solution to the problem is they say, oh, well, I didn't know I could do that. Or the problem might be that they don't really value your team. Like maybe they say they do, but their actions are speaking louder than their words. And that might be a more complex conversation to have. But I think you first have to identify the why behind it before you can start targeting it. I don't like if people just assume like the worst motive, because it might just be confusion.
Mm.
They might just be confused, and a simple conversation would clear it up.
Yeah, I love that. Great way of engaging with any issue like that. Great answer. So next question, do you feel we as humans need to focus more on usability research, more so than generative research? An assumption there being that AI will be better at generative research. Um, and the additional context here is earlier, there was an assumption that as you get more senior in a role, you focus more on generative research and usability. And is that changing with AI?
My opinion is that it's still true. Like I think we should still focus more on generative work. There still is a place for usability work now, but I think it's more likely that AI is running our usability tests than our. I mean, a lot of generative research methods are things like interviews, and those require so much more context. I know there's a lot of people out there that are using model like LLMs to do their interviews, and I think there's maybe a place for that. I'm open to it, but um, there's just so much context and nuance that I think usability tests, which are much more linear, typically. I mean, obviously, I'm generalizing. There are really complex usability tests, and maybe those are better left to people. But I think those are probably more first up, in my opinion, to be automated with AI, whereas you have more of like a monitor, a human in the loop on those. But AI will be able to run those before I think they're able to do generative and strategic work. Because it's not just the research, it's also what you do with the research. Generative work tends to be a lot more strategic, which involves all this squishy knowledge and this fuzzy knowledge that you don't have on your intranet, that you don't have in Google Drive. You don't have it somewhere where the AI can access it. It's fuzzy and it's all out there and it's between people, and you wouldn't even know how to tell it to. You wouldn't even know how to put it in a prompt if you could. And so those are much, I think, better off left to humans. Definitely have the comparative advantage there, and so I
Mm.
think that makes generative probably more the route that I would pursue. Like if I were deciding to hone my skills in one of the two, I would lean more generative. But I'm still open to opportunities where we might have the advantage in usability testing.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think probably there's so many different kinds of usability research, right? So if we're talking earlier on in product development, if we want to get feedback on more like a concept and understanding, pain points and usability there is going to be different than, a fully fleshed out workflow that we just want to stand time on task and things like that. Last question I have, I'm going to just read this verbatim. The question is it plausible to assert that AI is just a tool? This strikes me as an instrumentalist perspective. But when AI technologies reshape how people are restructuring and reshaping how they reason about concepts, is there not a broader ontological shift happening at an extended cognitive system level? when people are arguably satisficing more than ever, or when some poor souls kill themselves as a result of interacting with consumer facing LLMs. So, yes, in some contexts, AI is a tool, yet also more than a tool in other contexts.
Sure, there's a lot in that question. When I say it's a tool, I mean it in a broad sense. So if someone's using ChatGPT as a therapist, in a sense, it's not a tool at that point, right? They're treating it like a real agent, uh, someone with agency, like a human would have. But I mean it's a tool in the sense that um, it augments our performance. It augments our efficiency and effectiveness. So, and it's non-human. So in that sense, it's a tool. It's a non-living being that augments our work. And so I mean, in a very broad sense, I agree that certain uses of AI are not very tool-like in the sense that we usually think of a tool. So it really may be a difference in semantics, and there are certainly contexts that are that are much more like a human would be, and whether or not that's appropriate to use in that way, like that's a different conversation. But Yeah, I think it just depends on how you define a tool. I certainly don't mean to diminish the nature of AI by calling it just a tool. I probably, if I said just a tool, I shouldn't have done that because I don't think it's just a tool. But I do think it is a tool in the broad sense. And I think the mistake some people make is they think it's not like a tool, and therefore they draw these conclusions like, well, comparative advantage doesn't apply. It's not. These historical examples don't apply. Nothing applies because it's not really a tool. And I think that's where I like to say it is a tool in that sense. It's a tool in the sense that these theories and these examples still apply in some way, and we can learn from them as we learn how to interact with AI.
Awesome, Caleb. Thank you so much. We're at time. So I want to thank everyone for joining today. You can find Caleb on LinkedIn, which has just been posted in the chat. He also wrote a piece for Triangle UXPA that digs into this topic even more. So we'll pop all these links in the chat. Keep an eye on your inbox, and we'll be sending the recording to you to revisit later. And yeah, as you explore new ways to harness knowledge and AI-powered insights, discover how Great Question can help your team run research with their all-in-one platform. So there's a little link to a Great Question there as well. And thank you so much, Caleb. This was so interesting. Really enjoyed getting to learn more about these frameworks and to chat with you today. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you. It's fun.
All right, take care.